Good morning, students. In the last two lectures, we have discussed about the benign lesions of the vulva as well as about the dermatosis of the vulva. Today, we will discuss about the vaginal discharge. It is very important to learn about the vaginal discharge because most of the patients presenting to gynec OPD, they present with the complaints of vaginal discharge. So, it is the most common presenting complaints of females attending outpatient department. Excessive vaginal discharge may be physiological, normal, or pathological, abnormal. Abnormal vaginal discharge is defined as any one of the three presentations: excessive vaginal discharge, which is not physiological, offensive or malodorous discharge, and yellowish or mucopurulent discharge. Prevalence: it has been estimated that approximately one-third of the patients may complain of abnormal vaginal discharge who presents to the OPD. It can occur in females of all ages, from neonatal to the postmenopausal period, and it is quite common during pregnancy. Many clinics have reported that 70% of pregnant women manifest abnormal vaginal discharge due to lower genital tract infection. Normal vaginal discharge, it consists of 1 to 4 ml fluid per 24 hours. It is floccular in consistency. It is whitish and non-malodorous. Its normal pH is acidic and it ranges from 3.5 to 4.5, and it is due to the presence of lactobacilli, which converts glycogen to lactic acid. And second, there is secondary fermentation of endocervical mucus by vaginal flora that also contributes to the low pH. So this is the slide which is showing the normal vaginal epithelial cells and the lactobacilli, which are normal flora of the vagina in histology. Cellular contents of the discharge are composed of sloughed cells of cervical columnar and vaginal squamous epithelium. Bulk of discharge consists of serous vaginal exudate and from lubricating cervical mucus. Origin of normal vaginal discharge is from the vagina, cervix, and uterus and fallopian tubes. Vaginal canal. Vaginal canal, being ectodermal in origin, consists of stratified squamous epithelium. There are no sweat, sebaceous, and other types of secretory glands in the vaginal epithelium. So, vaginal fluid is largely derived from the serum transudate in the vaginal beds that seeps from the capillaries through intercellular channels, as there are no sweat, sebaceous, or other types of secretory glands which are present in the vagina. Small amount is derived from the Bartholin glands and also from the endometrium and the fallopian tubes. So content is transudates, which consists primarily of water and electrolytes, cellular debris, facultative microorganisms, which are normal flora of the vagina, fatty acids, proteins, and carbohydrates. Second is from the cervix, cervical source. Cervix is the principal source of vaginal secretion. The stratified squamous epithelium of the portio vaginalis changes into high columnar at the external os, which lines the cervical canal and cervical glands as well. The cervical glands, they are mainly of simple and tubuloalveolar type, and secretion they secrete is thick and viscid mucus. Remember, the secretions from the cervical glands during the proliferative phase is thin and it is less viscid, and during the second half, that is the luteal phase or the progesterogenic phase, it becomes more thick and viscid mucus. From the uterus and fallopian tubes, the discharge contributing to the normal vaginal discharge is very less. Though the uterus is lined by highly secretory columnar epithelium, they contribute less to the normal vaginal secretion. The secretion of the glands undergoes cyclical activity in the elaboration of glycogen and other nutritive substances in preparation for pregnancy each month. Tubes normally contribute nothing to the vaginal secretion. In rare instances of hydrosalpinx, which results from salpingitis, the tubal secretions may be expelled through the vagina in the form of watery discharge. So this picture depicts the uh, influence of the lactobacilli on the glycogen. The glycogen is accumulated in the vaginal mucosa under the effect of the estrogen in the female body, and this glycogen is acted upon by the lactobacilli, which converts the glycogen to lactic acid, and this lactic acid is responsible for maintaining the pH of 3.5 to 4.5, which is the normal acidic pH of the vagina. And in turn, this acidic pH, it facilitates the growth of the lactobacilli, and it inhibits the growth of other unfriendly or pathogenic bacteria. And again, the growth of lactogenic bacilli or lactobacilli, it converts the glycogen under the influence of estrogen, and this cycle goes on. So the vaginal ecosystem is a complex environmental condition consisting of interrelationships among the endogenous flora, microflora, metabolic products of the microflora, host estrogen, that is the female body estrogen, and the vaginal pH. Vaginal infection and inflammation occurs when this ecosystem is altered, whether there is less estrogen or there is lack of lactobacilli or there is non-formation of lactic acid because there is no glycogen or no lactobacilli for glycogen to be acted upon, or there is growth of other microorganisms. In that case, there is infection and inflammation of the vagina. When the balance of microorganism changes, potentially pathogenic organisms that are part of normal flora, they proliferate and they lead to overt infection and inflammation of the vagina or vaginitis. So, besides lactobacillus, other organisms which are a part of vaginal flora, they include bacteroids, beta hemolytic and non-hemolytic streptococci, Candida albicans, diphtheroids, enterococci, E. coli, mobiluncus, Peptostreptococci species, Staphylococcus epidermidis, and Ureaplasma urealyticum. So histological diagnosis of normal vaginal discharge is made if the following criteria are fulfilled. So if these criteria are fulfilled, vaginal and cervical infections can be safely excluded and the discharge is labeled as normal vaginal discharge. So at histology, there should be absence of trichomonad motility, there should be absence of filamentous elements, glue cells should be less than 20% of vaginal epithelial cells, which are a diagnostic criteria for bacterial vaginosis. Numerous lactobacilli should be present, and polymorphonuclear leukocyte to epithelial cell ratio should be 1:1. Then if these criteria are fulfilled, then the secretion or vaginal discharge can be labeled as normal on histology. So physiological causes of normal vaginal discharge are age dependency and excessive secretion in case of pregnancy and sexual arousal. In case of age dependency, neonate, infant, pre-puberty, childbearing and postmenopausal, the causes are different but discharge is considered physiological. In case of neonates and infants, neonatal vagina is lined by stratified squamous epithelium due to the influence of maternal estrogen. After 1 month to puberty, before 1 month there is effect of maternal estrogen. After 1 month till the female child achieves puberty, vagina is lined by squamous cuboidal epithelium and the pH is around 7, that is around neutral pH. Physiological discharge results from maternal estrogen and its action by the lactobacilli on the vaginal epithelium. Maternal estrogen is metabolized in 3 to 4 weeks, and after that the pH changes. There is increased susceptibility of infection of early neonate to Trichomonas vaginalis due to perinatal transmission, and early neonate it is resistant to Neisseria gonorrhea and Chlamydia trachomatis. And older infants, they are susceptible to Neisseria gonorrhea and Chlamydia trachomatis, but they are resistant to the vagina shows resistance to Candida. In prepubertal age group, just before the puberty, in prepubertal group, physiological discharge is the hallmark of impending onset of menarche. Due to unopposed secretion of estrogen, the ovaries stimulate vaginal and cervical secretions, leading to discharge. It is thin and mucoid and soils the undergarments. This discharge may be interpreted as infection. It ultimately subsides with the onset of cyclical progesterone activity, which also results in the onset of menarche. In case of reproductive age group or the childbearing age group, causes for vaginal secretion includes mid-cycle stimulation of endocervical glands by estrogen. Mid-cycle discharge is sufficient to keep the vagina moist and usually does not stain the undergarments. It may be associated with Mischelmer's or mid-cycle unilateral pelvic discomfort. And vaginal secretion in case of reproductive age group can be exogenous when there is semen of recent ejaculation. In the postmenopausal age group, there is atrophy of the vaginal epithelium due to diminished estrogen secretion due to atrophy of the ovaries. Thin serous discharge, occasionally blood stain, can be there, and it can be associated with itching and burning sensation in the vagina. Small areas of granulation and ulceration along with slight vaginal bleeding may develop in case of atrophic vulvovaginitis, which is very common in the postmenopausal age group. In cases of excessive secretion in pregnancy, physiological discharge is there, which is floccular in characteristic, and it may exceed 1 ml of amount on per speculum examination. And it occurs due to increased vascularity, congestion of the pelvic organs, and cervical hyperplasia because of the effect of estrogen and progesterone in pregnancy. Sexual arousal. In non-pregnant women, sexual arousal also results in increased vaginal discharge, and this is due to secretion from the Bartholin glands. Coming to the pathological causes, the earlier we have discussed were all physiological causes and the discharge was considered as normal. Now in pathological causes, the discharge is abnormal. So first is the non-infective causes. There can be chemical irritation because of the use of antiseptics, bathe additives, deodorants, detergents, spermicides or douches. There may be foreign body reaction IUCD, retained materials, retained tampons, and others medication like OCP usage can be there, which can lead to non-infective causes. And management is usually avoiding the irritant will cause the discharge to disappear, and saline baths may be recommended. The others are the gynecological conditions like endocervical polyp, fistula, radiation effects, post-operative, and in tumors of the vagina or in cervix there can be increased vaginal discharge. So gynecological conditions, if the discharge is mucoid and blood stained, it may be due to endocervical polyp. If the discharge is profuse watery discharge without mucoid content and it smells like urine, then it can be urine because of the formation of urogenital fistula. If the discharge is clear with slight bloody secretion following hysterectomy, then it can be vaginal walled granulation tissue. If the discharge is heavy vaginal discharge, it can be because of the vaginal or cervical benign tumors. If it is a frank bleeding, it can be due to malignant tumors. And if it is purulent discharge, it is mostly because of the bacterial infections. Second is coming on to the infective causes of the vaginitis, which is very important both for the OPD point of view as well as for the exam point of view. And the three most common causes are bacterial vaginosis, vaginal candidiasis, and vaginal trichomoniasis. So first, we'll come to the bacterial vaginosis. It is the most prevalent cause of vaginal discharge or malodor. It is a polymicrobial clinical syndrome. It results from replacement of normal hydrogen peroxide producing lactobacillus species in the vagina with high concentrations of anaerobic bacteria, for example Prevotella species and Mobiluncus species, or Gardnerella vaginalis, Ureaplasma, Mycoplasma, and numerous fastidious or uncultivated anaerobes. Some women they experience transient vaginal microbial changes, whereas others experience them for longer intervals of time, leading them to seek treatment for the vaginal discharge. But most women they can also be asymptomatic. So causes of bacterial vaginosis, it is associated with having multiple male or female sexual partners, a new sexual partner, douching, lack of condom use, and lack of vaginal lactobacilli. Women who have never been sexually active, they are rarely affected with bacterial vaginosis. The cause of microbial alteration that precipitates the disease is not well understood. Women with bacterial vaginosis, they are also at increased risk for acquisition of other sexually transmitted diseases, for example HIV, Neisseria gonorrhea, Chlamydia trachomatis, and herpes simplex virus 2. They are also at increased risk of complications after gynecological surgeries, complications of pregnancy, and recurrence of disease, that is recurrence of bacterial vaginosis again. So bacterial vaginosis, it also increases the risk for HIV transmission to the male sexual partners from the female counterparts. Signs and symptoms. Bacterial vaginosis, the signs and symptoms they include thin, grey, white or green vaginal discharge, foul smelling, fishy vaginal odor, vaginal itching, and burning during micturition can be there. But most of the women with bacterial vaginosis, they are asymptomatic, that is, they have no symptoms. So diagnosis is clinically by symptomatology and by per speculum examination, which shows thin grey, white or green vaginal discharge, and there is fishy odor of the discharge. And diagnosis can also be made by the clinical criteria, that is the EMSILS diagnostic criteria. According to EMSILS diagnostic criteria, it requires three of the following symptoms or signs to be present for the discharge to be labeled as discharge of bacterial vaginosis. It should be homogeneous, thin, white discharge that smoothly coats the vaginal walls. Second is presence of clue cells, that is the vaginal epithelial cells, which are studied with adherent cocobacilli on microscopic examination. pH of vaginal fluid should be more than 4.5 and a fishy odor of vaginal discharge before or after addition of 10% potassium hydroxide, that is known as the whiff test. So this is the slide which is showing the bacterial vaginosis as histology. So the first diagram is showing the clue cell, first slide, and the second slide is the magnified slide which is showing the epithelial cell and numerous bacilli which are studied on the epithelial cell. So it can also be diagnosed by gram staining, which is also considered the gold standard laboratory method for diagnosis, and it is used to determine the relative concentration of lactobacilli, that is the gram positive bacilli, gram-negative and gram-variable bacilli and cocci, that is Gardnerella vaginalis, Prevotella, Porphyromonas, and Peptostreptococci, and curved gram-negative, that is Mobiluncus, which is characteristic of bacterial vaginosis. Because bacterial vaginosis is caused because of the alteration of the relative concentration of lactobacilli and other normal vaginal microflora. So this is the gold standard. We see the relative concentration of different types of bacteria to determine that to make the diagnosis of bacterial vaginosis. Other tests for diagnosis are proline aminopeptidase card test. It is available for the detection of elevated pH and trimethylamine, but it has low sensitivity and specificity, and therefore it is not recommended. PCR of the microorganisms. This has been used in the research settings for the detection of variety of organisms associated with bacterial vaginosis, but evaluation of its clinical utility is still underway. Detection of specific organisms might be predictive of bacterial vaginosis by polymerase chain reaction test. Additional validation is needed before these two tests can be recommended to diagnose bacterial vaginosis. Then culture of Gardnerella vaginalis can be done, but it is not recommended as a diagnostic tool because it is not specific for the disease. And cervical pap tests, they have no clinical utility for the diagnosis of bacterial vaginosis because of their low sensitivity and specificity. Treatment is recommended for women with symptoms. The established benefits of therapy in non-pregnant women are to relieve vaginal symptoms and signs of infection, and the other potential benefits of treatment they include the risk in the reduction of acquiring chlamydia trachomatis, Neisseria gonorrhea, Trichomonas vaginalis, HIV, and herpes simplex virus type 2. The recommended regimens are metronidazole 500 mg orally twice a day for 7 days, or 0.75% gel, one full applicator, that is 5 gram gel intravaginally once a day, usually at night time, for 5 days. Then clindamycin 300 mg orally twice daily for 7 days, or 2% cream, one full applicator, that is 5 grams intravaginally, again at night for 7 days, or 100 milligram ovules intravaginally once at bedtime for 3 days. Third one is tinidazole 2 grams orally once daily for 2 days, or 1 gram orally once daily for 5 days. Alcohol consumption should be avoided during treatment with nitroimidazoles to reduce the possibility of disulfiram-like reaction. Abstinence from alcohol use should continue for 24 hours after completion of metronidazole. Certain studies have evaluated the clinical and microbiological efficacy of using intravaginal lactobacillus formulations to treat bacterial vaginosis and restore the normal flora of the vagina. But overall, no studies support the addition of any available lactobacillus formulations or probiotic as an adjunctive or replacement therapy in patients with bacterial vaginosis. Other management considerations, they include all women with bacterial vaginosis should be tested for HIV and other sexually transmitted diseases. And follow-up of these patients, follow-up visits are unnecessary if the symptoms resolve. Because persistent or recurrent bacterial vaginosis is common, women should be advised to return for evaluation if symptoms recur, and detection of certain bacterial vaginosis associated organisms have been associated with antimicrobial resistance and might be predictive of risk for subsequent treatment failure. This is mostly in the patients who are having recurrent episodes of bacterial vaginosis. Management of the sexual partners. Data from clinical trials indicate that a woman's response to therapy and her likelihood of relapse or recurrence are not affected by treatment of her sexual partners. Therefore, routine treatment of partners of bacterial vaginosis is not recommended. So, pregnancy and bacterial vaginosis needs a special note. Pregnant patients who develop bacterial vaginosis needs to be treated. They are at increased risks of various adverse perinatal outcome. Pathogenesis and symptomatology in pregnancy is same as in non-pregnant patients. Diagnosis is also by the same criteria, that is either by clinical Amsel's criteria or by the Gram staining criteria, but treatment it needs special consideration in case of pregnant patients. So adverse pregnancy outcomes, they include the premature rupture of membranes, the onset of preterm labor, preterm birth, intraamniotic infection or chorioamnitis in certain cases, postpartum endometritis. It has also been associated with symptomatic patients in various observational studies. Treatment is recommended for all symptomatic pregnant women. Studies have been undertaken to determine the efficacy of treatment among this population, including two trials demonstrating that metronidazole was efficacious during pregnancy using 250 mg regimen also. Otherwise, oral metronidazole 500 mg twice daily to be equally effective as metronidazole gel has been uh, stated in various studies with cure rates of around 70% using the EMSEL's diagnostic clinical criteria to define the cure from disease. Multiple studies and meta-analysis have failed to demonstrate an association between metronidazole use during pregnancy and teratogenic or mutagenic effects in newborns. Another trial demonstrated a cure rate of around 85% using Gram-Stain criteria after treatment of oral clindamycin. So, uh, concerns regarding the vaginal clindamycin during pregnancy and adverse outcomes for the newborn are being nullified by some newer data which demonstrates that this treatment approach is also safe for the pregnant women. Because oral therapy has not been shown to be superior to the topical therapy for treating symptomatic bacterial vaginosis in effecting cures or preventing adverse outcomes of pregnancy, symptomatic pregnant patients can be treated with either oral or vaginal regimens recommended for the same regimens as recommended for the non-pregnant women. Treatment in pregnant women can reduce the signs and symptoms of vaginal infection. A meta-analysis has concluded that no antibiotic regimen prevented the preterm birth, early or late, in women with bacterial vaginosis, whether they are symptomatic or asymptomatic. But data is there that has shown that oral therapy reduced the risk of late miscarriages and decreased adverse outcomes in the neonate. Although metronidazole crosses the placenta, but no evidence of teratogenicity or mutagenic effects in the infants has been shown in multiple cross-sectional and cohort studies of pregnant women, and data suggests that metronidazole therapy it poses a low risk in pregnancy. Metronidazole is also secreted in breast milk in puerperal patients. With maternal oral therapy, breastfed infants receive metronidazole in doses that are much less than those used for treating infections in infants, although the active metabolites adds to the total infant exposure. Plasma levels of the drug and metabolite are measurable, but they remain less than the maternal plasma levels. Although several reported case series found that no evidence of metronidazole associated adverse effects are there in breastfed infants, some clinicians they advise deferring breastfeeding for 12 to 24 hours following maternal treatment with a single, that is high dose 2 gram dose of metronidazole. Lower doses produce a lower concentration in breast milk and they are considered compatible with breastfeeding. Patient can breastfeed while taking metronidazole at a lower concentration at the same time. In case of HIV infected patients, bacterial vaginosis appears to recur with a higher frequency in women who have HIV infection. Women with HIV infection with bacterial vaginosis should receive the same treatment regimen as those who do not have HIV infection. Thank you. And rest of the bacterial infections causing vaginitis as well as viral infections causing vaginitis will be discussed in the next lecture. Thank you so much.